You can start, Chairman.
Participants from the industry, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It gives me immense pleasure in welcoming you all to this e-commerce retail supply chain 2022 with the theme Adapting to Win Latest E-commerce Wave. It is indeed heartening to see the overwhelming participation of all logistics stakeholders. I'm told almost 850 people have registered for this program. That shows the kind of interest that people have in this. We are privileged to have Dr. Surendra Ahirwar, Joint Secretary of Department for Promotion of Industry and Industrial Trade, DPIT, Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Government of India. He'll be joining in another 10 minutes. His first 14 years of career was with Indian Railways as Director, Public-Private Partnership, Infrastructure and Commercial. He's been with the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Government of India for the last 5 years as Joint Secretary, Logistics, Free Trade, DPIT and PM Gati Shakti National Master Plan. Our sincere thanks and special welcome to him. I would like to welcome Mr. Prahala Thanvar, Global Head Logistics and Transportation, Kpmg. Kpmg have extended knowledge support for this conference. Prahalad has over 20 years of transport and logistics consulting and industry experience spanning India, China, US, Germany, UAE, Oman, and Kuwait. I would also like to welcome Mr. Shobi Cherian, Senior Director, DHL Express India Private Limited. Shobi Cherian has close to 3 decades of experience in DHL, responsible for strategic planning, driving change, and operational excellence. Successful and proven expertise in executing business development plans across large geographies in India. I'd like to talk about a few initiatives of CII Institute of Logistics, significant initiatives which include there were many suggestions from all stakeholders. CII Institution of Logistics have initiated pilot projects to demonstrate voluntary adaptation of warehouse standards. We will be able to circulate the good practices in near future. As part of ongoing Indo-Japan cooperation in human resource development, we are continuing with the implementation of CII Certified Warehouse Kaizen Practitioner Program. We've also concluded consultation process related to state logistics and warehousing policies. Focus states include Maharashtra, Uttar Pradesh, Assam, Tamil Nadu, and Haryana. The actionable recommendations are available in the report, Building Logistics Capitals. We completed significant survey on assessment of logistics competency, skills, and training in India with the support and guidance from the World Bank. A few words about this conference. This conference, with special emphasis on adapting to win latest e-commerce wave, will examine 3 emerging paradigms. Shoppers who demand flexibility, convenience, and shopping experiences at their fingertips are increasingly becoming common. The new paradigm includes emerging tech solutions, innovative delivery models, and emergence of dark stores. The differentiator in today's e-commerce is more inclined towards services such as order status communication, location-based services with focus on last-mile delivery. Numerous technologies are available to meeting field service requirements. With 5G networks on the anvil, we may see greater innovation in location-based technology solutions in our industry and in many industries as well. E-commerce logistics would be required to emphasis on green standards. Maybe it should be in packaging, documentation, or delivery. The need for adapting sustainability principles is only going to increase in near future. We have lined up a very good day in terms of the participants and the lead presenters in this conference. I'm sure all the stakeholders will be immensely benefited and there will be exchange of ideas. The technical sessions in this conference will discuss on all these areas. And may I now request Mr. Shobi Cherian to deliver his special address. Over to you, Shobi.
Good morning to all. Thank you, Mr. Sankar, for setting the contest so well. And thank you, Dr. Banu, for inviting us to the forum. DHL works with a large number of e-commerce businesses all around the world, and this gives us a bird eye view of the developments across various supply chains which e-commerce customers use, be it domestic express or cross-border express or warehousing or even the safe freight and air freight services. Today's topic in our view is pertinent both for logistic professionals as well as CIA members who are basically working in the B2B or in the B2C verticals. E-commerce has democratized the buying experience with free information flow and great. It's a great model for price discovery across product portfolios. As we look at how to adapt to the new wave, which is what the forum wants to do for the whole day, it's also important for us to have insights and learning of the last couple of waves. So there's always learning from how the last waves behaved, and it could help us predict the future. So in our view, we have passed maybe around 3 waves. The first one started in 1995 when Mr. Jeff Bezos went in and tried to get $1 million in funding, and he launched Amazon, and that sparked the e-commerce wave. Back then, we would only go online to kind of save time, and the differentiation was only price, right? So we knew that if it had to be cheap, yes, we could go and pick it up from the web, and obviously that gave rise to price comparison engines, web shopping, Yahoo types came in. Ultimately, as express companies, so we had to gear for a different set of challenges, because we express companies or freight forwarding companies, domestic courier companies, were basically working in the B2B space. So we would have operations to pick up and deliver shipments maybe in the Paris area or in the Gindi or the Ambattur area in Chennai, but not as much in Ananagar. But what really happened was that with a deluge of retail customers coming in and picking up e-commerce businesses, we also had to adapt and increase our a kind of coverage to retail centers in around the world. The second change which happened during the first stage was that our call centers just couldn't manage the kind of calls we're getting from retail customers. They wanted to know where the shipments are and when they will get it. And we had to really innovate and add people. And that was the first time when we started thinking about a digital infrastructure. How can we manage these kind of calls digitally? So that's around the first wave. And I think the second wave started somewhere in 2006, 2007. This was basically brought in by the e-commerce companies, because by that time they realized that they had infinite sales space. They could sell any number of products. So it could be long tail or short tail, and also a lot of influencer marketing came in to push these products out. So we had Instagram coming in, Twitter or Yahoo or YouTube coming in, and people started pushing products, and suddenly we found that we could go in and pick up stuff which we wouldn't have physically experienced. So and retail companies helped, because they started something called the free return shipping, which means I could buy the product, but it was okay if I didn't like it, I could return it back. So that really pushed e-com businesses around the world. And suddenly for logistics companies, we found out that we had not only had to deliver shipments, but we also had to pick up shipments from the customers. And in India at that time, I think close to 24-25% of our shipments were reverse logistics shipments. So it did help the logistics player in terms of managing cost. But also, since the product portfolio moved up so well, we also had to manage different weight ranges. So we had conveyable shipments, which were smaller shipments, which one person could carry. We had non-conveyable, which were slightly larger shipments. So the air capacity in the country got built up. We had to even pick up road capacities, and that's when the first mile, middle mile, and the last mile operations came up. Dr. Shankar did explain about the focus on last mile, and that's when we had to really ramp up. Warehousing also had a lot of ramp up to be done because many customers wanted to be closer to their regional cohorts of customers. So we had close to models around regions where we had to get warehouses closer to the regions. Then we had models which were central, but all these things again helped us push the digital platform, because to kind of get all these various models together, we had to have a robust digital platform. So again, digital infrastructure was still strong in wave 2 too. And obviously, yes, by 2012, 2013, we saw a lot of consolidation happening in the industry. Some of the weak players fell down. But I think the third wave, as we call it, would have started somewhere around 2012, 2013. I'm sure all of you remember that Tesla, which was an automotive company, was a research company, came in and launched Model 3 in US. And they did not have a great manufacturing infrastructure, but they kind of sold the story. That was the first time storytelling came out as a big differentiator. And with a prototype, they picked up 3 lakh orders, and they made customers pay $1,000 per piece. And the commitment for the car delivery was, say, in 3 years hence. So that was the first time when B2B companies, or industrials as we call them, also found out that yes, the web is a powerful tool for them to sell their wares out. So same thing happened in India, maybe in 2018, 2019, when Ola Electric came in, and they kind of sold 1 lakh electric scooters with a couple of protos. Yeah. So for logistics companies, it was different, because now we had to also take care of the demand part of the business, which was in terms of, say, delivering the scooters or delivering the EV infrastructure across many parts of the world. But we also had to be in the supply side, helping these companies pull out, say, parts and from across the world. So this was the third wave. But I guess this third wave has pretty long legs, and and it is still continuing, because a lot of B2B companies are directly want to work with customers, as we call it as D2C at this point in time. So what does the future of e-commerce look like? I'm sure Prahlad will have a nuanced view of it, but from an industry point of view, we're just not sure whether we are in wave 1, wave 2, or wave 3, as all the waves have a lot of runway. And in the global context, maybe many parts of the world could be in wave 2, but in the India context, I think we are between wave 3 or wave 4 in terms of developments happening in the industry. So in terms of themes as to what we see for the future and how would the next wave build up, we see 4 to 5 large themes happening. So the first one is in terms of digitalization. We have been, say, digitalization has been a theme across the waves, but I think right now it's about building collaborative end-to-end platforms, getting, say, employees to have a digital mindset and to listen to customers who are building unique solutions. We also see the next level of expansion coming, because a lot of our customers are using VR technology, chatbots, etc., to push sales across channels 24/7, and which means that we also will have to develop real-time frameworks and kind of be ready for the next level of business volume increments. We also see disruption in terms of marketing models. We see a lot of premiumization happening. Amazon has Prime, Nike has the same kind of premiumization models. We also see subscription models. We also see a lot of change in terms of payment models coming in, which is making a business easier for customers to pick up from any e-commerce company. Like we have on-the-go deliveries. Like for DHL, we had worked with Volkswagen and Mercedes-Benz to deliver shipments on the go, which means if you had a particular model of Volkswagen car or Mercedes-Benz and they had the software inputs, we could communicate to the customer, and he could allow us to deliver his shipment into his car trunk. So we use big data and we use GPS technology to kind of reach the customer's car and deliver it. So a lot of technology innovation is going to happen, and the sky is the limit, but for companies like us, we will need to push the packet. We'll also find younger companies coming in. You've seen Zepto, they want to deliver in 10 minutes time, which means logistics companies will have to really rework the whole process around delivery times. The third theme we see is in terms of demographics. Millennials are becoming a large part of our customer base. I think by 2030, close to 70% of the customer base would be millennials. So engaging with them becomes very important. Right now, say we get a lot of customer queries, and which are basically from millennials, which come through Twitter or which comes through Facebook, which comes through LinkedIn. And so companies, legacy companies like us, will have to be ready to revert back to customers, as well as to kind of feedback this information back to our customers, for whom we are delivering shipments. Well, yes, millennials are also part of our young workforce, and hence a lot of training for them and to help them to careers also becomes extremely important as we move to the next wave. Uh, yes, Tesla did start the wave three, which was kind of getting the industrials and the business to business companies to focus on D2C models. I think that is going to be a large wave. Say, be it Nike or say Closer Home, be it ITC or Marico, all of them want to connect directly with their customers. So, which means the logistical companies like us in the domestic or the cross-border space will have to be the one who will complete the connection. Yeah. And the fifth theme, which we see emerging, which Mr. Shankar did touch upon, is about the ESG part of the business, the environmental, social, and governance part. It's not a fad anymore. Sustainability is key to business growth, and customers are also willing to support companies which are investing on ESG themes. Like for DHL, so we have a large fleet of EVs. We are the logistic industry is not a very clean industry because there is a lot of CO2 emission around. So for DHL, right now we are close to 17,000 EVs running around the world. By 2030, we will move that to 80,000 EVs. So close to 60% of our fleet will be electrified by then. We're even working on battery-powered aircrafts. By 2024, we will have close to 12 aircrafts which are battery-powered. Right now, the range is around 800 kilometers, but maybe we can carry around a ton plus, but it's a good start. But what we see is that customers remain supportive and are willing to go the extra mile in terms of cost if we are working on green technologies. And we see different product portfolios which are very green coming in, and that is something which we see will grow. So these are the five themes. As a practitioner of logistics and as someone who is supporting customers, these are the five themes which we see happening in the market. Our government, we have Dr. Ahirwar also joining us. So right time to even thank the government for supporting industry. We have been working with CIE on a couple of themes. So the government came in and supported the industry with the cross-border industry with ECCS, which was a tool which would help say Indian exporters who are moving e-commerce shipments to clear shipment on the same day, which means from Chennai, if anybody wants to send a shipment, they could clear it, custom clear on the same day, and we could put on the flight by the same evening. So it gives a lot of competitive advantage to Indian exporters who wants to do cross-border exports. We're also working with CII to help the AU customers in terms of giving facilitation on in ECCS. So we see the government support as very important in terms of helping the industry grow. So it's an interesting day with a lot of sharing of best practices, looking at future models from industry experts. So thank you, Dr. Banu and the CI India team for this effort. Thank you all and good luck.
Thank you, Shobi. Over to you, Prahalad, for your presentation.
Sir, before that, I think Dr.
We can-
Surendra Hariwar has joined.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Dr.
Thank you for joining.
Surendra Hariwar, thank you for joining. I talked about it in my inaugural address, but I see you now. Welcome, sir. Welcome to this program.
Thank you. Please carry on.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. And thanks, Shankar, for the introduction, Shobi for the overview, and Dr. Ahirwar. I also want to take the opportunity to thank CII. And while we just put up the presentation, Shobi spoke about waves, and I think waves are very relevant in e-commerce and e-commerce retail, right? It's not just about 1, 2, or 3 waves. I think we're going to see continuous waves, whether it is innovation, whether it's the operations, whether it's the investment that goes into the sector, whether it's the new systems and technology platforms that are adopted. And I think also very important, the client profile, Shobhi, that you mentioned, right? Moving from millennials to Gen Z and onwards. And I think all these aspects are going to influence e-commerce retail and e-commerce retail logistics for sure. But before I dive into my presentation, I just want to take a quick moment to highlight that we've had the privilege of being associated with CII Institute of Logistics since 2015. So in many ways, this has been a marriage where Kpmg has built this e-commerce retail logistics platform, this knowledge platform over the last 8 years. And Shyam, if you can just move to the next slide, please. And I think it's been a very interesting journey because, along this journey, when we started in 2015 and, some humorous insights is we thought that we could release a report every alternate year, right, to substantiate what is actually playing out. But interestingly, by the time we published the report and we actually launched it, we found that given the industry was going at 40-50% year on year, already some of the numbers were being outdated. So we tried, as you can see from this interesting slide, for the first 4 years, we actually made an attempt to publish a report so that the industry at large, had a definitive guide to what was playing out, whether it was the size of the industry, whether it was the new models that were being built up, and various other aspects, right? So it's been an incredible journey. Obviously, 2020, 2021 were blank out years, but I have to say that these 2 years really accelerated the e-commerce industry, right? As we were all locked up. And I think not just here, but all over the world, we've seen tremendous progress for the e-commerce industry. And I think it has a very bright future. So while many of us believe that it's already an industry that is reaching some degree of maturation, I will demonstrate through my presentation that we're actually in the very, very early stages of the evolution of the e-commerce retail industry. And I think there's lots to come. There's going to be a lot of transformation and exciting times ahead for all the stakeholders that are associated with the sector, whether you're a logistics operator, whether you're an end user, whether you're an investor, or interestingly, even if you're a regulator, right? So I think it's going to be a very exciting, interesting sector. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank CII Logistics again. I think it's a wonderful knowledge base and platform. And interestingly, what I'm going to try and do over the next 10 odd minutes is I'm going to try and pull out some of the data points that we had actually highlighted back in 2015 and 16, right? To actually see that 8 years on, what is the industry looking like? So with that, Shyam, if we just move forward, please. And if we just start interestingly, and I want to talk about 4 broad, interesting data points, right, which actually define the Indian economy and that everyone talks about. And I want to juxtapose where e-commerce retail is in this. So if you start right on top and you look at, I've created 3 buckets or 3 waves, if you like. If you look at the start of the millennium in 2000, we then move fast forward to 15 years in 2015, which is when we launched the first report. And closer to present day, we're taking 2021 because we have some accredited numbers there. And first, if you just look at how the Indian economy has grown, and I think it's very important to understand the backdrop, right? Because the rest of the economy, the rest of the nation, continues to move at a certain pace, and some fundamental levers keep changing. So if you look at how we've evolved, you'll see that there've been some very interesting developments, particularly in 2015 and 2021. You'll see that industry has increased significantly from 18% to 25%, right? And for that, as we all know, there's been a lot of thrust by the government and the regulators, and a lot of investment that's gone into building more manufacturing capabilities in India. And if you look at this time frame from a GDP perspective, and starting at little under $500 billion in 2000 and looking at closer to $3 trillion now in 2022, you'll see that we've grown at somewhere between 8.5% and 9.5% over the last 2 decades, right? And it just shows that India has continued to sustain a very promising growth rate. And we've had this number of $5 trillion economy. Obviously, we took a little bit of a beating in the pandemic years, but for us to achieve the $5 trillion economy, we'll have to grow a little over 15% year on year for the next 5 odd years, right? So, it's a tall ask, but I think the important thing is that we definitely have a base. And if you look at the population, which is another very important aspect, which has recently been in the news because we have infamously now overtaken China, or at least that's what the statisticians say. You'll see that our population also has kind of grown in the low single digits. Even at that, it's quite an aggressive growth. But I think more importantly, if you double click on the population and the growth over the last 2 decades, you'll find that there's been a clear shift from the urban population or the statistics. So back in 2000, less than 30%, approximately 28% of India's population lived in urban clusters. And you fast forward to present day where it's almost 35%, right? So we are seeing a significant shift. And the reason I highlight this is when you talk about retail, we're seeing more concentration of now urban clusters, which means more concentration of retail. We are also talking about the tier 2, tier 3 towns, right, becoming the key drivers of e-commerce retail going forward. And the reason is a lot of this population is now clustered actually in these tier 2, tier 3 towns. And the view is that this trend will continue to kind of move in this direction over the next decade or two as well. Now let's talk about the per capita income, right? Because while we talk about GDP growth and we talk about other aspects, I think what's very interesting is if you look at where we are, per capita income has gone from what, $450 back in 2000, and we're currently around 2000, right? So it's quadrupled. But the reality is we've barely stayed ahead of inflation, right? And that's a very important point for us to reflect on as an economy and as a nation. I think while there has been growth, I think inflation currently looms, and it's a very important factor for all to consider. Right, so that is the limited point I wanted to make about the economy. But if you look at what's happening in e-commerce and e-commerce retail, it's a completely different story, right? So if you go back to the turn of the millennium, you'll find that it was the few outliers, the few pioneers, people who were way ahead of their time, right? So we mentioned folks like Elon Musk, but there were several others also at that time who were still dabbling in the whole e-commerce and the .com area. But you see, it was negligible. If you look at that number in 2000. We really don't want to put a number to it because it was really kind of, very small, irrelevant number. You fast forward to where we are in 2015, right? And by 2015, I think e-commerce and e-commerce retail particularly had clearly arrived in India, right? We knew the brands, they were at that point, 3 companies that had already created significant scale, had attracted billions of dollars in investment. And you'll see that at that point, the size of the industry was pegged at about $4 to $5 billion US, right? But I think the real magic has happened between 2015 and 2021. So if you look at the growth of e-commerce retail in this period, it actually grew a little over 40% year on year, right? So it's doubled and quadrupled a few times over in the last 5-6 years. And if you look at where the industry is today, you'll see that in a short period, it is closer to $45 billion in 2021, right? And the forecast is that it will continue to grow at a growth rate at over 35% over the next 5 years. So you'll see that e-commerce retail, and this is something that we all know that it's been growing, but it's interesting when you see the numbers and you see compared to the rest of the economy, compared to other factors, it's a complete outlier. So with that context, and just maybe moving forward to our next slide, I want to talk about logistics in India, because I think many of us here are fundamentally logisticians. Many logisticians are still grappling with age-old operational issues, whether it is high container rates, whether it is lack of infrastructure, so on and so forth, right? But there's also this important requirement for many of us in the industry to pivot and understand the opportunity in e-commerce logistics going forward. So if you look at the overall, and what I'm going to do here is just very simple graph. In purple, you're seeing the way the Indian logistics industry has grown, right? So we're saying that as of FY21, the size of the Indian transport and logistics industry was about $220 billion US. The size of the e-commerce logistics industry was only about $2.6 billion, right? But I think what's important over the last 4-5 years, look at the growth rates. Even though we say that India is one of the fastest growing logistics markets in the world, and it is, right? So India's logistics market, as you can see from here, has grown somewhere between 9.5 and 10.5% over the last decade, and will continue to grow at about between 10 and 11% over the next 5-6 years. You'll find that the e-commerce logistics market has actually grown almost 4x of that, right? So we're talking about a very, very nascent, very exciting space, still very much in its early stages. So companies are still being formed, investors are still trying to find their way around, and there's still going to be a lot of dynamic growth and changes that play out in this industry, right? And I think this is a very important aspect for many of us as logisticians to appreciate and understand that we're currently only at about $2.6 billion in terms of the spend on logistics for e-commerce retail as an industry. But this is going to grow, and over the next 4 years, as you can see, it's going to more than quadruple, right? So just moving ahead, I want to talk a little bit about, when we spoke about waves, I want to try and talk about some operational waves that have played out, right? So when we go back to 2014-15, we saw that the way the major e-commerce retail companies were developing their supply chains were fundamentally was very different, right? It all started off, and some of you all may remember these nomenclatures and terms. It started with what is called the inventory-led model, where the major e-commerce retailers used to actually buy products from the, from manufacturers, store them, and then push those out, right? Once you ordered via their apps or their websites. In the last 5-6 years, we have seen multiple pivots and flips to these fundamental models. So we moved to what is called the fulfilled by model, right, which is a slightly nuanced model. We then moved to the marketplace model, which was even more nuanced and clearly demonstrated a shift away from what was the asset-heavy model to the asset-light model, at least from a inventory holding perspective, right? And while I've just put some of the headline waves, there have been many in between. There's been the drop ship. There have been many other changes to the supply chain. And what we're basically saying is that the fundamental supply chain that is driven by the major e-commerce retail players has gone through tremendous and dynamic changes. And currently, we're in a very, very interesting phase. It's what many of you all may have been hearing. It's called D2C, right? It's a term that keeps popping up everywhere. And what does D2C really mean? D2C essentially means that today, with the proliferation and penetration of handheld devices, the internet, many smaller brands, many smaller agencies can actually retail their product directly from their websites, right? So whether they create their own app, they create their own website, you don't have to go to the aggregators anymore. You can go directly to some of these players. And you'll find that this is going to be a trend that plays out very aggressively. In fact, our forecast is expected to grow from about 4% in FY20 to about 8% in FY25. So this is going to double that. In fact, it's going to more than double. And from an e-commerce logistics perspective, it means that no longer is the logistics necessarily going to be very concentrated by the e-commerce retailers. There's going to be a little bit of liberalization of the way e-commerce logistics operates. And a lot of other players are going to be able to kind of set up and service these. We've already seen hyperlocal. We've already seen some regional logistics, e-commerce logistics operators emerge, right? So, watch out for this space. D2C is going to be very interesting, and it's going to be one of the most prominent structures of how e-commerce retail is going to work over the next few years. Thank you, Shyam. Just moving forward, please. So let's take this one step further, right? And let's now make this. So I spoke about the different models that have played out, but I also want to talk about the different logistics, the way logistics companies have had to evolve with these dynamic changes that have played out. So if you rewind to pre-2015 or leading up to 2015, I want to quickly explain these colored dots or these gems that you can see, right? The teal, which is the light green color, is actually the traditional players. And by traditional players, I mean the traditional courier companies in India, the traditional express companies in India, right? And we had some fantastic companies at that point in time. You had companies like First Flight, you had DTDC, you had Blue Dart, of course, right? And several others. Then the darker blue dot is, and I'm just referring to the legend on the top right-hand side before I get into the slide. The darker blue dot represents the captive players, right? And the captive players are those in-house arms that were developed by the major e-com retailers, right? So we're talking about ATS by Amazon. We're talking about eCart by Flipkart. We're talking about Vulcan, which was then developed a little bit later and then ultimately sold off by Snapdeal. We're talking about companies like Go Javas, which was created by Jabong. These are all legendary companies, right? But some of them have already kind of lived their lives and in fact don't exist anymore. And all this in the span of the last 5-6 years, but it's very relevant. Then you have the non-captive e-commerce specialized players. So these were companies that started off in 2010-12 that built capabilities only to serve this industry. So we're talking about, in green, companies like Delivery. We're talking about companies like Ecom Express. We're talking about companies like ExpressBees, all fantastic companies, right, that realized very early that this is a very different supply chain. It requires different technology, different capabilities, different operation nuances, and they actually built those capabilities. And finally, you have what we're now seeing is the hyperlocal, or the omni-channel play as well, right? So that's a new term that's emerging. So that's a yellow dot. But I think the most interesting point is if you go back to FY15 and you look at the numbers, the number of daily shipments for e-commerce retail in India at that point were about 650,000 shipments a day, right? If you fast forward to where we are in FY21, you'll find that that's actually 8 million shipments a day, right? Some would say it's a little bit more. I would say it's about between 8 and 8.5 million shipments per day. And if you fast forward to FY26, right, which is the very near future, we're looking at about 23, 25 million e-commerce shipments a day, right? So we're talking about tremendous growth. And this goes back to the slide I showed earlier. It's going to grow almost 4 times the overall logistics market, and e-commerce, of course, is growing at closer to 45% year on year. But you'll see that the nature of players that serve this industry has actually changed in these 3 time frames. So if you go back to FY15, you'll find that the traditional players that had that network, that had already built it out, serving document businesses, were in a very, very advantageous position, right? And one would have thought that they would have capitalized on this whole e-commerce wave. But if you look at what happened to this light green, teal bubble in FY21, you'll find that this is today actually among the smallest, right? So clearly means that the traditional players, the courier players, were not really able to capitalize. And there were many reasons for this. I think some of the reasons were the fact, and I think, again, as was being mentioned by Shobi, operationally, a lot of these courier businesses were not designed for parcels, right? So whether it was, right from the aircrafts, which are narrow body, to the kind of storage, which are more pigeonholes rather than racking systems for larger packages. Then there were elements like cash on delivery. A lot of the courier companies were not equipped to handle cash on delivery, right? And a lot of other technology nuances. A lot of them were built on around a franchise network, whereas e-commerce, you required more control. You needed that customer promise in terms of last mile delivery, a very, very nuanced, very important aspect. So you will see in FY21, we saw the real emergence of the captive players, right? And this is no surprise. We've seen this in other industries as well. I'm sure Shankar will testify. If you go back 20 years, the major automotive players in India, right? TVS Motors, Mahindra Motors, when they were trying to create world-class capabilities, they realized that in the industry, there was a certain vacuum. There weren't enough service providers to serve them. So for them to meet the capabilities or the requirements of the industry, they had to actually create these capabilities in-house. And that's exactly what the successful e-commerce retailers have done globally, for that matter, right? And then you also see this, the green one, which is the rise of the specialized e-commerce players. So because they were not really had the baggage of historic operations or serving other industries, they were very quickly able to ramp up, and they were able to handle a lot of the overflow shipments that were emerging out of the e-commerce businesses, right? And then if you fast forward to where we are today, of course, you'll see the hyperlocal businesses, very exciting business. It goes back to the fact that we're also seeing a little bit of democratization. I'm sure I don't want to steal any thunder from Dr. Ahirwal, but this is also very exciting space for e-commerce and logistics specifically, and how that plays out, and how the hyperlocal and how some of the smaller e-tailers and the smaller logistics providers can play a larger role in this entire transformation, right? Thanks, Sham. Just moving forward, please. So coming back to the point I made right at the beginning, looks like a really big industry, but actually, if you compare us to global markets, we're still taking baby steps. So if you look at the size of the e-commerce retail market alone in India versus some global countries, you see that India is at 65 billion, right? But if you look at, and let's start with China, right? Because I love this example. China has about 25 times the size of the Indian e-commerce retail market, right? We're talking about a country where almost 46% of the total retail market is actually now happening through online channels, whereas in India, I think it's about 9 to 10%. If you look at the US, the US is about 14 or 15 times the Indian e-commerce retail market, right? You look at United Kingdom, because let's look at a smaller country, you'll find that certainly the value of the basket is a lot higher, but it's still almost double, or precisely double the size of the Indian e-commerce retail market, right? So India is just at the early stages of taking off. I think the reason I want to highlight this is very important to get context. Sometimes we get very absorbed in what is happening within our own borders and don't realize what the true size of the potential of this industry is, right? So you'll see from this slide, and I have a few statistics. I don't want to go through all of them. The key takeaway is that the party is just starting for e-commerce retail and resultantly for e-commerce retail logistics. And I don't think anyone is too late, right? In fact, we have the benefit of learnings over the last 5-6 years. There have been a lot of pioneers that have built capabilities in this space. And I think a lot of learnings to take away. And, there have been a lot of fundamental changes. So, if you look at the fact that today, you will find that a lot of e-commerce deliveries that come to you actually don't come in bikes anymore, right? They all come in these one-tonner vans. And this transformation has happened in the last 2 years. About 3 years ago, almost 90% of all shipments that happened through bikers. Today, you will find that the entire model is shifted to one-ton vans, right? If you go back 4 years, you'll find that any e-commerce shipment in India that was more than 500 kilometers, 80% of that moved via air, right? Going back to Shobhi's point around air capacity. But today you'll find that almost 90% of all e-commerce shipments in India, it doesn't matter, how far or across the country, actually moves via road. So surface transportation. And these are major shifts that have happened, right? In terms of the operations, the delivery, the way the supply chain works. So just rounding off with some trends, looking at the future before I hand back to Shankar and Sham, if I can ask you to just move to the last slide, please. I want to talk about 5 trends, very interesting trends. I want to keep it a little light, but interesting. One is sustainability, right? I think the fact that ESG today is the overriding factor, doesn't matter what industry you're in. For those of us who are not aware, the transport logistics sector is the second largest contributor to global emissions, right? So I think this is something that we need to be talking about a little bit more. We need to be a little bit more aware. And what e-commerce is actually doing is it's creating a lot more strain on the environment, right? Because previously, you didn't order 10 times to get your shopping basket, right? You used to go to a brick and mortar store and buy it. But there's a massive impact that e-commerce retail is having on the environment. I think there are some pioneers, like Shobhi said, and DHL is one of them, that's creating this capacity in terms of EVs, in terms of packaging technology. I think there's a lot of work to be done there, right? So it's a very exciting space. The second is the rising importance of flexibility inventory management. And I already spoke about how things have already moved, but there's a constant focus on trying to optimize your inventory. It moved from inventory-led to marketplace models to now dropship. But we see that this will keep evolving. So it's going to be very interesting to see what are the more efficient models that start emerging, right? I think the third is I want to talk about the shift, the basket, right? So a few years ago in India, consumer electronics was the overriding focus of almost 58%, if I remember correctly, of the e-commerce retail market in India was actually consumer electronics, right? And things like apparel, jewelry were actually a little bit lower down. This is going to completely change. In fact, it already has. Apparel has today become the largest segment of e-commerce retail. So most of the online buying today is apparel. We see that moving to jewelry. Food, of course, there's been significant in terms of ready to eat, but food, even in terms of groceries, massive area. And we're going to see a lot of changes there. Health and beauty, we've already spoken about companies like Nykaa that are doing a tremendous job, but there are going to be many others that are going to come up over the next few years. And finally, cost, right? And I wanted to highlight this and end on this slightly challenging note. Everyone hopes that there's more money to be made in e-commerce retail, but the reality is that the efficiencies are getting more and more stringent, right? So today, or maybe about a few years ago, it used to cost about 100 rupees per shipment. Was the cost to serve an e-commerce shipment, right? So when you ordered online, if you were wondering how much it costed a company to deliver it to your home on the 15th floor, wing A, flat number, 50, 55 or whatever, it used to cost about 100 rupees per shipment. That has already moved to about 75 rupees per shipment, right? And the expectation over the next 3-4 years is that's going to become 65 rupees a shipment. And the reason it's coming down is because companies are getting more efficient. They're using more predictive mechanisms. You're using a lot of data that was not available 5 years ago, which is available today. You're using better models, better inventory models, so lower working capital, so on and so forth, right? So this is just meaning that e-commerce logistics is getting very, very efficient, and technology is going to play a big role, and it's going to be a very interesting space to watch. And finally, the fifth one, of course, is ONDC. And Dr. Ahir, I'm going to hand over to you. Like I said, I'm not going to steal any thunder, but very exciting. We all want to hear a little bit more about that. And thank you again for the opportunity. And I hope you're able to take something away from this.
Thank you, Prahlad. That was indeed a great presentation talking about trends, and I'll summarize it in the end. We are privileged to have Dr. Surendra Hirwar, Joint Secretary of Department of Promotion, Industry and Internal Trade, DPIT, Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Government of India. His first 14 years of career was with Indian Railways as Director Public-Private Partnership, Infrastructure and Commercial. He's with the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Government of India for the last 5 years as Joint Secretary, Logistics, Foreign Trade, DPIT, and also the PM Gati Shakti Master Plan, National Master Plan. Welcome to you, sir, and over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Shankar. Thank you, CII Institute of Logistics, and greetings to all you conglomerate of the e-commerce industry and the industry in general, industry magnates. It's a privilege to be in the midst of you all, and once again. So it's a really always a pleasure to be amongst you and in the midst of you, joining for such brainstorming sessions on very, very relevant topics like e-commerce, retail supply chain is a wave to reckon with, and is a tremendous. It's like it's just not a wave. I'd say it's a storm, right? Which is being witnessed in the country or even globally. And I really appreciate CII Institute of Logistics for bringing also the experts together to talk about this topic, very interesting topic. And if I look at the snippets like, of the e-commerce industry, we are one of the fastest growing e-commerce markets in the world. We have almost more than 1 million or 1.5 million transactions on e-commerce in the e-commerce sector in a day. We are one of the largest and the preferred retail destination globally as well, where I'm told we stand only second in the Global Retail Development Index in year 2021, which is a really appreciable point. And of this, we are seeing a great trend of conversion of the conventional retail into a e-commerce retail, a digitally enabled, more efficient, more comprehensive method of retailing. So we have seen maybe the way which we are talking today owes its kind of for the intensity to the last 2 years, which we say the dark years or blank out years for the economy generally and the life as well. But it has been, an opportunity for the e-commerce to grow, and there has been tremendous digitization, tremendous e-commerce commercialization of the trade, especially, and therefore it has, sustained the business during the pandemic years, and also the life of the people, just not in this country but globally as well. Yeah, we have been seeing that e-commerce is capturing the largest share of the retail sector, and the retail sector, on the other hand, if not significantly, going down, but definitely it's not growing so well as well. On the other hand, the e-commerce is rapidly growing and growing almost at the rate of CAGR of, as I'm to refer a particular estimate, it's growing at the CAGR of 35%. And maybe in last 2030, by 2030, it will grow over to 150 million online shoppers, which we have in year 2020. So there's a tremendous movement, there's tremendous traction and dynamism. And what we are seeing as a wave, it has been so very well explained by Mr. Prahala, and then while presenting the report, KPMG's report on e-commerce, tremendous. I mean, this is really a wonderful, observations which have been made out here, and we are able to understand, and now we actually stand educated, how this wave is created or the storm is created of e-commerce, and what are the underlying determinants of this way. And if we look at the e-commerce, if in a very simple words, I have to explain e-commerce or to understand e-commerce, it is basically a conventional retail added to that the delivery services. And of course, it is digitally enabled. So we see that the new element which is added to the retail is the logistics or the service related to the delivery of the product, which is, and then of course, the third element, the digitization, it's making this activity so attractive, just not for the seller, but also hugely attractive for the consumer, right? And therefore, we also come to realize that the logistics is a very, very important and vital component of the e-commerce. Though it may not have the name as to say the logistics dependent retail, but instead we call it e-commerce because the digital component has been the dominant one. But what I feel is of these triad of retail, the logistics, and the digital technology, I mean, if not more important than other two the legs, they are all these three elements are the vital and equal in importance, and therefore have to be looked at. And as has been explained in the report, the share of the logistics in the e-commerce or the growth in the logistics industry or the logistics sector in terms of services or the infrastructure has been really positive. And it's being facilitated by the government also, but I can give more credit to the private sector for this boom in the e-commerce sector and also the logistics related to the e-commerce, which is largely confined to the private sector initiative. If we look at the e-commerce, I mean, we are generally talking about from the business perspective or businessmen's perspective for that matter. But if we look at from the consumer's perspective as well, it is tremendously beneficial to the consumer. I think consumer is at the focus of this entire wave, and the sellers are competing to serve the consumer in the best manner. So when there's a competition among the sellers, so it is becoming basically the buyer's market. So if I am to say, e-commerce is more of a buyer's market than the conventional retail sector. So this is how the consumer is becoming more important. If I am to say why the consumer is getting so important, I think primarily, I mean, which the experts like Mr. Prahala can further examine. I think there are three sparing effects which are tremendously benefiting the consumer through e-commerce. One is the income sparing effect which e-commerce have on the consumer's income in particular, because it is saving the expenses which the customer or the consumer would have spent on going to a shop and coming back. It also saves his money or her money on account of the competitive pricing which is happening. The greater visibility of the products, greater opportunity to compare the prices, and the competition among the sellers itself. This is kind of leading to a better price being given to the consumer. So this is one as a income sparing effect, which I would say call it. And this is income sparing effect is finally coming back to the consumer sector, or in fact, it is increasing or enhancing in a way the purchasing power of the customer, which is further leading to increasing sale, increasing demand, because the spared income would be spent somewhere. So this is a kind of a new stream created, which is increasing in a way the consumer's power to purchase. This is another sparing effect, the sparing effect of time. When a consumer is able to save time, he is spending his time on some other economic activity, which may be in a way monetized to an extent, but definitely it improves his quality of living. He's able to do in a very, very small time, and maybe in a few minutes, he's able to transact or complete a transaction for purchasing some service or some product for that matter. So this is having a kind of huge time sparing effect as well. The third sparing effect, which I would like to mention is the sparing of the environment. It spares the air from being spoiled. It definitely checks the emission. I mean, for purchasing a small thing or one item or many items, the entire household or individual moves by his own vehicle, emitting a lot of smoke and causing emissions, and this causing a pollution. It is also congesting the logistic systems or the infrastructure which we have, the facilities which we have, and kind of causing a damage to the environment. On the other side, the e-commerce guy, I mean, it is one tonner or a 2-tonner vehicle or a couple of bikes. They are serving a cluster of households, and therefore they are in a way having a sparing effect on the environment. Therefore, this is a greener, relatively much greener form of retailing or transacting business. So these are the sparing effect, which I say the advantage to the consumer, and consumer further remains in the focus. It also increases the consumer's convenience. It fetches them the competitive price, and of course, the quality is also ensured through this entire process. So, if I am to conclude on this the advantages part, the consumer is at the center of it. Consumer is the most advantaged component or individual in the entire e-commerce dynamics. Now, as I said, the e-commerce is largely and predominantly the initiative or the business or the participation of the private sector, but the government has definitely been catalyzing and also setting examples of its own. Like you would have seen, I mean, the entire procurement of the government of India, and also, if not all states, most of the states, the government procurement also, we have now adopted GEM, and therefore this procurement is also done through kind of in an e-commerce manner or mode. And besides this, government is also facilitating or tending to facilitate this wave, this storm, through its various policy initiatives, be it about Digital India, Make in India, Startup, Skill India, and we have created the Innovation Fund to fuel the e-commerce industry further. We are also tending to facilitate development of infrastructure, including the urban infrastructure, which is very relevant for the e-commerce players in the e-commerce sector. And not only this, we are also looking at development of entire, the continuum of logistics infrastructure, starting from packaging, warehousing, or the transport infrastructure of various modes. That's being looked at through various initiatives of Government of India, and they are going to be further addressed in a much more greater manner through the National Logistics Policy, which may see the light of the day very soon. We have also, as you would be aware, that we have launched a National Master Plan, the Kpmg National Master Plan, which is a GIS-based platform, helping us to develop infrastructure, the logistics infrastructure, in a very integrated and synchronized manner. This is promoting multimodality, intermodality in a big way, and we have already seen the early signs of improvement in the efficiency of the governance of the project implementation, and whether it is related to the planning of the projects, or the approval of the projects, or the implementation in a very synchronized and efficient manner. So this is already in a very advanced stage, and it's being patronized by just not all the departments of Government of India who are into development of infrastructure, but also by the states. And I can say all the states and the union territories have already adopted this PM Gati Shakti National Master Plan and have started utilizing it for the purpose of integrated planning of the projects and the implementation. Government of India is also supporting the states through a special financial assistance in form of the capital assistance as long-term interest-free loans to the states. And this would have helped the state to develop the infrastructure in an integrated manner. We have also decided to, in fact, most of the work is done already for publishing a handbook on standards for physical assets or the warehousing in particular, and which shall be again published by the industry. And I would give due credit to CII Institute of Logistics for playing a very, very important role and contributing to development of this handbook of standards on warehousing, which is ready to be published. And this will help in conversion of the unorganized sector in the warehousing to organized, much modern, technology-enabled warehousing, and which would be, of course, relevant to the e-commerce again. Government of India has also taken an initiative to develop open network for digital commerce, which is a platform, a kind of a democratic platform, which would enable any player, whether it's a retailer himself who is in at the stage or into a brick and mortar store they're operating, they can also be onboarded on this platform, and they can take necessary logistics services through this platform and join the e-commerce wave, which is otherwise digitally enabled and being steered by the prominent players in the digital world, and with the capacity which these conventional retail operators may not have. So this is going to help them as well, and in a way it is going to increase the footprint of the e-commerce even to the B class or C class towns and even the villages. It would also provide an opportunity to the application operators or the site operators, the e-commerce site operators who can get connected through an API to this platform and then operate their own business. So it is going to definitely pose a competition to the existing major players or minor players already operating through various platforms, which are global platforms operating in India. So this is going to further democratize the e-commerce sector and help growth of the sector further. In fact, I would see it not as a threat to the conventional retail sector, but an opportunity to them if they can adopt to the new technology and quickly adapt to a new situation is going to only benefit them and to the consumer as well. So it's going to be a win-win situation, which this e-commerce wave or a storm is providing as an opportunity. If I'm to prescribe something, keeping in mind the priorities of the government and looking at the trends in the e-commerce sector or in the trade generally, I would suggest, of course, the focus on the logistics has to remain to ensure sustainability of e-commerce, because any e-commerce player or operator is just being smarter operator if he has a smarter logistics, and he can overnight and in a couple of minutes or hours they can just collapse. I have seen this personally as well. I mean, there have been smarter solutions in form of the quick delivery services which have been provided by rather so many nowadays, whether it's a Big Basket, Blinkit, or Instamart, they all operate on a very kind of a fragile system, and it is just because they are depending on a logistics service provider who is probably combining the warehousing or the fulfillment center plus the delivery services. And I'm not very sure how efficient and robust and resilient these services are, and how much competition which has gone into while picking these services. But they are fragile in the sense that, I mean, Instamart has been giving a very good service in a particular territory of Delhi itself, a locality of Delhi itself, and I mean, it was like so impressive that I stopped taking the products or my groceries from a vendor who's just in my basement, right? The vendor in the basement would have taken, half an hour, at least half an hour, or maybe hours, or maybe he will say, we have received your order in the morning and we'll deliver it by evening. But let me tell you, these guys promised for 19 minutes and they delivered in 11 minutes. Really impressive. And we stopped taking services of the local vendor, or it's not a local vendor, a vendor in my house, in-house vendor, right? But suddenly there was a collapse. 2-3 days back, I mean, I get some message that whatever you have paid for against an order or 2 orders, that money is being refunded. And sorry, we are having some technical problem because of which we are not able to deliver the service. And since then, the services stopped. Now, which probably indicates the vulnerability and the lack of the resilience in the services, which again highlights the importance of having robust logistics solutions. And the digital platform operators alone cannot create that robustness of resilience. It has to be in the physical assets and the services, the physical component of the services, the human component of the services, the mobile component of the services. This is what has to be looked into. And therefore, whatever investment, which is private investment, which is happening, it has to happen. If at all we are looking at a greater growth of the e-commerce, this investment has to happen. Besides in the digital or the technology that's being made out of it, it should also happen in creation of these infrastructure, which eventually creates efficient services. So for this, a suggestion which I can give to the industry players and also to you, the ideologues of the industry, I think this warehousing sector, which is otherwise considered and called as a storage infrastructure, it should not be even called or perceived as a storage infrastructure. Dynamism has to be added to it. And if warehouses, a conventional warehouse, can be converted into a modern warehouse and combined with it the last mile and the first mile delivery or return logistics added, or the service added, I think it provides a complete localized solution which can be integrated by various digital network or platforms which are kind of aggregating these services, right? And there can be a local integration or aggregation, which further can be, many localities can be aggregated by the otherwise the principal aggregators who are operating at the at a regional level or a national level. So at present, what is happening? It is a limited number of players who are operating at the pan-India level are only directly aggregating the services, and this is becoming a microscopic aggregation. So there has to be some kind of a 3-tier consolidation and a vertical integration or the aggregation. While at the field level, there can be a localized aggregation of the services, of the goods, of the vending. I mean, there can be consolidation of the vendors and then creation of a hub in localities, which may be kind of 50 or 100 kilometers, 50 kilometers, 25 kilometers, or 10 kilometers, those localities. And then these local aggregators can be further aggregated at the second tier level, maybe at the state level or multiple state level, right? Or there can be territories of the country. So there can be regional players and there can be national players. So national, regional, and local aggregators, and a vertical consolidation or vertical aggregation can also take place. So this can be helped by expanding or diversification of the existing logistics services like warehouses, and if the transport service providers can also combine with it the delivery services, just not connecting to destination, origin and destination, or to stations, but also connect the household. Like you might have seen even or user services. One day I ordered for something, a cake for that matter, I'll take a specific example, and the cake maker or that the vendor has sent me the cake through Uber services, who are otherwise a passenger transporter. They are not taking me to the doorstep. So this guy, the driver of the car, came down to my locality and rang my bell and delivered the cake to my doorstep. So this is a kind of extension, diversification of the service which will have to take place. If the retail could expand to integrating, absorbing into it the logistics services and become the so-called the e-commerce part of the e-commerce wave, I think this is a good time to and a right approach for the existing logistics service providers to expand their services, do a necessary backward integration and forward integration, and provide a more complete solution. And with this, I think enough of prescription. I'll just spare you all guys and wish all the best, and wish this cost-effective retail supply chains enhance the competitiveness of the industry and protects the interests of the consumers, and definitely takes care of the business interests with a positive growth in the economy, positive growth in your business and your profits. Thank you very much for inviting me. All the best.
Thank you, sir. Now we've come to the final end of the inaugural session. So let me try and summarize all the speakers, and we had very good, thoughts that came out from all the speakers. We had Shobhi Cherian, who spoke about the first thing about how the different waves, starting from 1995, when Amazon was kind of born, to the digital infrastructure, to the D2C model that we have come in. And he spoke about the coming emerging themes. He called it the fourth or the fifth wave, which is the digitalization, the marketing models in terms of how premiumization, subscription-based or models are getting emerged, and even the on-the-go delivery models, and how millennials or the demographics are changing, whether it's in terms of consumption or whether it's in terms of our own employees who come in and serve various things. And our channels of communication should be in line with what the millennials would demand. And the next most important change, which of course everybody spoke about, is the movement from the B2B to the D2C. The last important thing that he touched upon was the sustainability or the ESG, which is very, very important moving forward. Prahala Thanvar made a very good presentation. He spoke about how they wanted to make a biannual report, and then with the things in e-commerce changing so fast, they had to come out with an annual report, and how, barring the last 2 years, every year they have partnered with CII Institute of Logistics. And I remember a couple of years ago, I happened to be in one of the forums and sharing the same thing. And whatever we had spoken about, I think about 4 years ago or 5 years ago, all the numbers today have been broken, and things have moved way ahead of what one would have thought would happen in this industry. So we spoke about, the inventory-led models he spoke about fulfillment model to the marketplace model, and now the emergence of D2C. And his prediction is that D2C, from being around 3 to 4%, would go to at least 8%. And different models of, delivery would emerge for serving this D2C, which was touched upon by Dr. Thanvar as well. Then he spoke about how different players, the traditional players, could not keep pace and change with what the emerging needs of e-commerce were, which led to captive players coming in, and from the captive players, specialized players coming in, and new age players in the hyper-local delivery model. The interesting statistics was from 8 million shipments a day, there is still potential to go to 23 to 25 million shipments a day. So that's the kind of e-commerce growth that's going to happen. He very rightly concluded by comparing with the other markets and China with almost, when we are still at 65 billion, and that itself is a substantial 35% CAGR growth. He spoke about how the markets in China is, say, $1.4 trillion in the e-commerce segment, and the penetration levels are something like from 7% in India compared to 24% in China. So that's a bandwidth available now and more to go with. So it's very interesting times. On the other trends that he spoke about were in terms of sustainability, channels of inventory and how inventory needs to be managed, and how multi-channel, omni-channel inventory will become a more important thing, and how the category of consumption through e-commerce is moving away just from being electronics to other, whether it is staples or groceries or soft goods, etc. And how in all this efficiency is playing a big role, and how the cost of shipment being 100 coming down to 75 and moving down further. Dr. Surendra Agarwal gave a very good start to the whole thing by saying e-commerce is not just a wave, but it's a storm. And he spoke about the growth of the e-commerce industry in the last couple of years, and how he said that it is, in a way to look at it, is a conventional retail added to delivery services, and of course enabled by digitalization. And he also looked at, very interestingly, not from just the service providers or from the e-commerce industry's perspective, but from the consumer's perspective, what it has done. It has kind of led to income sparing, time sparing, and environment sparing effect. And these are three very great themes that he very ideally, rightly brought about, which is kind of enabling the industry grow faster. And we are going to see it take shape, and India is really a market poised to grow very well. Also, he spoke about the government initiatives in promoting e-commerce, from their own procurement by the center, various departments, as well as the states coming on the GEM platform, plus the other initiatives that the government is taking, which not necessarily is for the whole economy, but it's also enabling e-commerce, which is the Digital India, the Startup India, Skill India, Innovation, Make in India, etc. And also the urban infrastructure in terms of whether it's warehousing or whether it's storage, packaging, transportation. We also spoke about the PM Gati Shakti program, how the states and all the departments are looking at an integrated planning and implementation of the whole GIS-based platform, which is enabling infrastructure creation in a faster manner and in a more efficient and integrated manner. The last he spoke about was in terms of course, the standards release for warehousing, which CII has contributed quite a bit, and he acknowledged the same. We've all been part of it, and I hope that standards will make a significant change to the industry, which is we are all looking forward to for a long time. The last one is about the ONDC and how even the small retailer or the e-tailer can become an e-tailer because of this platform. And all of us are confident that, like the UPI has changed the way payments are being made, and India is the largest, digital payment economy in the world. ONDC, the initiative taken by the government, would substantially change the way e-commerce is consumed in Tier 3, Tier 4 cities, or even in villages. He gave a very good example, of a personal example of how you build something, a service like the last mile hyperlocal delivery, the 10-minute delivery or the 19-minute delivery, but how we should prepare the resilience in that, and how we cannot have a technical glitch coming in. So the importance is not just the digitization or the data, but the physical service or the human component of the service, which is the most important thing. And I'm sure all the industry members have taken note of this, and we will surely invest in this so that this becomes a sustainable solution. And the other good point you made and concluded your speech was about how instead of just having national players, how we should have regional, local, and hyper local players, and then they get consolidated through a network which is open, and then there can be a horizontal or a vertical aggregation of the same. So that's a very good thought process. So very interesting thoughts came up in the inaugural session. Thank you very much for all the speakers for contributing, and it's a great session for everybody. And I'm sure the day is packed with many sessions from industry experts, and I'm sure all the participants will substantially benefit. We are about 4 minutes delayed in our close, but we will start the next session at 11:45. Thank you very much, and I'm sure we will all have a great day today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shankar. Thank you once again, Mr. Mahidhar and CII, other, if I'm not able to name all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.